Every local government in the United States has started to think about mass shootings and how to prevent them, from cities and their police departments to schools and their lockdown drills. However, what authorities should do about it is a matter of intense debate, due to differing opinions on the cause of so many shootings. For example, virtually all experts agree that mental health issues play some role, but it's taken a blue ribbon panel to figure out how much.
There's a big misconception that for anybody to perpetrate a mass violent crime, they must be mentally ill. And this is simply a misconception by the lay public to think that this is so irrational that somebody has to be out of their mind to do it.
Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman is a professor of psychiatry at Columbia University Department of Psychiatry.
Doing it for some completely implausible, immoral, and unimaginable purpose is not prima facie basis for making a diagnosis. And even if somebody reacts irrationally due to an incident that occurs or a belief that they've developed and allowed to fester, that doesn't mean that they're mentally ill.
Lieberman is a member of a panel convened by the Medical Director Institute of the National Council for Behavioral Health. Its extensive report concludes that yes, many people who commit mass violence are mentally ill, often suffering from untreated psychotic or mood disorders and compelled by their symptoms to act. But it's far from every perpetrator. Dr. Joseph Parks is a medical director for the National Council for Mental Well-Being.
For the studies that looked for things like a diagnosis of bipolar disorder, of schizophrenia, what's usually thought of as a substantial mental illness, the portion came in around 25%, a quarter to a third of perpetrators of mass violence had either a prior diagnosis or a post-diagnosis or clear evidence that they had that sort of disorder at the time they did the act. That compares to 19% of the people in the general population that have a mental illness at any given time. So it appears somewhat more likely than the general population, but it's not the majority of causes. And if we just look for mental illness, we'll miss the majority of mass violence.
However, that only speaks to those with a diagnosable mental illness. Perpetrators with mental health issues may be much more common, or if you define it differently, it may be much less.
The studies all use different definitions of what that researcher considers to be mental illness. It goes all the way from the federal definition for the no-fly list, the NICS list, where you can't have a gun or fly, in which case that study found 4.7% of people perpetrating mass violence had a mental illness, a very low number, to the high number being a study that used a definition that they described as evidence of mental distress. Well, I'm sure most people don't consider being distressed to be a mental illness, and that study found 68% of people perpetrating mass violence had some mental distress.
But since the numbers make it clear you don't need a mental illness to commit mass violence, shouldn't we account for those with mental distress somehow? Lieberman says those who are not mentally ill fall roughly into two categories.
The first is people who are ideological zealots, i.e. terrorists. They're people like maybe foreign terrorists, like radical Islamic groups like Al-Qaeda, or they're domestic terrorists like Timothy McVeigh, who blew up the Oklahoma government building. The second group are individuals who are disgruntled, disaffected, alienated individuals who have been fired at their jobs, slighted by society, feel that they're somehow disenfranchised and living at the margins of society. And these individuals are the individuals fired from the post office and comes back and shoots up his boss and employees, to individuals who are kind of survivalists.
The common characteristics are these are people that are angry. They feel that life has been unjust, that the community has treated them unjustly, and they identify with groups they feel have been treated unfairly also. They are angry to the point of being hateful, and they're usually fascinated with weapons also. These are the most common factors, and simply put, anger and hatefulness is not a mental illness. It's a social illness.
If we really expect to do anything about mass shootings and other mass violence, Parks says we can't be simply guessing about the people who are at risk of carrying them out. So the first thing we need, according to the report, is for groups like the Centers for Disease Control and the Department of Justice to agree on the definition of mental illness and mental distress. Once we do that, Parks says we need to be better equipped to identify it in people and offer them mental health first aid. It's a cornerstone of recommendations to prevent mass violence.
This is the mental health version of Red Cross first aid, where the average person like yourself gets an 8-hour training to identify signs of mental distress and skills trained on how to talk to a person in a way that's reassuring and to get them connected to treatment where they can be helped. That would be a very early preventative measure. We need to have more campaigns where see something, say something. If you're worried about something, there needs to be a place that people need to be encouraged to reach out, and they need to know who to go talk to.
To get that help, the report's recommendations call for a variety of institutions to be equipped with resources to deal with such events.
Schools should have them. Employment settings should have means of this. Primary care systems should be connected to mental health care. And in that context, having some type of information provided to the HR offices or to the school health office or counseling office that gives them the kinds of things to look for in individuals and therefore think that perhaps they're at risk for having some type of mental distress or mental illness, and then based on that, proactively try and engage them instead of waiting until something happens.
Parks says in some locations, the process has been more formalized with threat assessment teams that bring specialized experts to evaluation and intervention.
This is a method put together by the FBI where you have a team that includes law enforcement, it includes attorneys to protect rights and to assure prosecution when needed. It also includes human resource if it's workplace, school personnel if it's school, and it includes behavioral health. But it's not just a behavioral health clinical. It's a broad investigation of all the risk factors done in a multidisciplinary setting. We're seeing more of these in corporations, at universities, at school districts, and we need to have them in every community. So if you're worried about John, you can give that message to the risk assessment and management team, and they can start taking a look.
However, Parks admits that since people with mental health issues are often isolated, they and any danger they may bring are sometimes very hard to spot.
There's a lot of people that fit that description that will never harm anybody. We'll end up looking at a lot of people that in the end we're not going to act. This is the problem with mass violence in general. It is a very rare event. It's less than 0.1% of all homicides. And it's difficult to predict or prevent rare events compared to common events. The easier things to intervene on are things that happen more commonly. I think the best we can do is keep our eyes and ears open. If we see something at workplace, we talk to HR. If we see it at the school, we talk to the school. If we see it in general, we talk to the police. And then we need to have these risk management and assessment teams that can do more thorough investigation.
But when an investigation confirms a high risk of threat, what power should authorities have? The Blue Ribbon Committee has recommendations.
One excellent method is with the extreme risk protection orders, or red flag laws. These are laws available currently in 17 states where people can go to a judge and say they're worried about John. John's been muttering to himself. He's been saying somebody's got to pay. He's not going to take it anymore. He's been talking about his guns more. And we're worried, we're getting scared of John, Your Honor. And if the judge is persuaded, he can have the police go take John's guns temporarily. So it involves due process. It's not the police acting alone. There's a judge involved, and there's a process for John to get his guns back after there's been some investigation and discussion with John about why he's talking in such an angry, threatening manner. These laws also show great reductions in suicide.
However, Lieberman says red flag laws are a symptom of a much bigger problem, the lack of an effective mental health care system in the United States. He says that we need to be a lot better at recognizing and treating mental illness long before it gets to that point.
Red flag laws could be passed to make it more difficult for certain groups to obtain firearms or other types of constraints. And even though it's really the Band-Aid solution at the downstream consequence of failed mental health care, it's certainly something that's worth doing if it has, because it could have an impact on the frequency and the lethality of these crimes. It is, in that context, one of the tips of the iceberg of that failed policy, along with homelessness, suicide, addiction, the growing population of mentally ill people in prisons. So it is kind of the extreme consequence of what happens when you don't have a healthcare system that provides adequate care to this segment of the population.
You can find more information about Dr. Jeffrey Lieberman, Dr. Joseph Parks, and all of our guests on our website, radiohealthjournal.org. This segment originally aired November 2019 and was written and produced by Reed Pence. Our lead producer is Kristen Farah. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. I'm Elizabeth Westfield. Coming up next week on Radio Health Journal.
How do you, as a research organization, outweigh the pros and cons of a treatment that you're doing if you don't take into account the voice of the patient?
Why lupus patients deserve to have a bigger voice in treatment research.
Then, steps you can take to improve your quality of life.
Because we have this quality called neuroplasticity, we can rewire our brains. It's a little bit difficult at first. That's why it takes a plan, it takes intention.
All that and more on Radio Health Journal.
I'm Nancy Benson, host of Radio Health Journal. If you enjoy listening to Radio Health Journal, you'll also like our sister show, Viewpoints, which covers a wide array of topics from education to history to the environment. Here's a preview of what they're covering this week on Viewpoints.
As one teacher told me, teaching is the only profession she could think of where you could have 2 advanced degrees and still make less than $50K.
The unsustainable landscape of teaching in America. Then,
not only, what videos you watch, but how long you watch them, when you click on them, all of that can reveal information about you.
Why you should care about whether you're being tracked online. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth this week on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
Listen to Viewpoints on your favorite radio station and subscribe and listen to shows anytime on Apple Podcasts and Google Play.
And that's Radio Health Journal for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more. And check Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify for a library of past programs. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and information about our guests at radiohealthjournal.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Radio Health Journal.